It was as though this plan had been with him all his life, pondered through the seasons, now in his 15th year, crystallized with the pain of puberty.
A storm is coming, Frank says. A storm that will swallow the children, and I will deliver them from the kingdom of pain. I will deliver the children back to their doorsteps. I'll send the monsters back to the underground. I'll send them back to a place where no one else can see them. Except for me. Because I am Donnie Darko.
Wake up.
I met Sean when we were seniors in college. I went to USC, he went to UCLA. He helped me with my grad film that wasn't really a grad film. It was this self-financed 35mm project called Visceral Matter.
And they needed a producer, and not that I knew much about what that meant at that time. I was still in college, but he sent me the script and it was crazy, and we started working together from then on. After we did the film, of course, we're college graduates broke and need jobs. And I took a job as an assistant at New Line Cinema, and Richard took a job at a post facility where he was like the post gopher, replacing toilet paper in bathrooms and stuff, just so he could get access to the editors and the avids at night to help, cut his film.
Initially, I was actually Richard's stalker. I saw that he had this project, and I saw some of the other client assistants working on it, and I could see that they were confused. I took advantage of that confusion and usurped Richard's student film called Visceral Matter. We started working together off hours, building this crazy time travel student film.
And using the equipment at 525 post-production and driving back to Hermosa Beach and wondering what was going to become of my career. I had this film degree. I'm living in Hermosa Beach in this disgusting house with 4 other friends from college, and I'm like, what is going to become of my life? And that panic you feel. And so I set out to write Donnie Darko, and it was my first script, and I saved up for 23 years to write that script, and it was 23 years in the waiting, and the floodgates opened and I went for it.
Well, I think it was literally a blender of all of Richard's influences from growing up, from filmmakers to authors like Philip K. Dick and Richard Matheson, and the great kind of Twilight Zone era of writing. And you mix that in with the nostalgia of growing up in the 80s and what was going on politically at that time. I mean, a lot of the characters and experiences in the movie, or at least, some of the prototypes in the movie, Richard experienced himself. I mean, he had a Grandma Death, who they called Grandma Death, in his neighborhood growing up, who would walk back and forth to her mailbox. So he was drawing from his own experiences as a kid who had a wild imagination, and then drawing upon all of the science fiction that he loved growing up.
It was one of Richard's first scripts, and I tend to think that a first screenplay is like a first album. A screenwriter, or the musicians in this case, have lots of time to think about what's going to go into the screenplay, and so there's something about it that's usually special. And I think Donnie Darko was a very special screenplay. We spent a lot of time, not that much, 2 or 3 months kind of developing it, because I think it was about 160 some odd pages when he first sent it to me. And we worked on it a little bit, and through my contacts of working at New Line for a couple of years at that point, I was able to get it into the agencies to start getting some reads. And it really just caught fire then.
Everyone read it. Everyone had a response to it. Everyone wanted to meet me.
Nobody had read a script that ambitious in quite a long time.
So Richard was the flavor of the month, but I think he was confusing the town. I think the screenplay was very dense. Popular screenplays really shouldn't have complicated things like time travel in them, because that will confuse people.
I know this is gonna sound kind of weird, but do you know anything about time travel?
it really was just thought of in town as the great writing sample, the great unproducible script. Richard was very firm about directing it as well, which is tough when we were both 23, 24 at the time.
As I expressed my desire to direct and my stubborn resolve to do so and my vision for it, it was a lot of like, oh, bless your heart, you know. Right, okay, good luck with that.
And it really wasn't until we got a random call that Jason Schwartzman was interested and loved the script, and it was really out of nowhere.
And he had a lot of fans from Rushmore, and he was this emerging star, and he really loved the script. And when he attached, we got this second wind, and all of a sudden it was a hot script again. And then because Jason attached, it validated me as a filmmaker.
During that time, Nancy Juvonen at Flower Films, who is Drew Barrymore's producing partner, was literally just curious as to what Jason was doing next, because her and Drew were such big fans of Rushmore. And so her agent mentioned that he wanted to do this script, and Nancy read it, and she flipped for it. You know, our agent calls and says, Nancy Juvonen and Drew Barrymore want to meet with you on this. We went to the set of Charlie's Angels, met Drew and Nancy in Drew's trailer, and they had clearly been discussing it. The script Drew had tabs all over it. They were really, really, really into it.
Very quickly, a pact was made with Nancy and Drew and Sean and I, and with Drew's attachment to play the English teacher, Karen Pomeroy, we were able to raise $4.5 million.
And then in Drew and Nancy producing really kind of elevated the project. I mean, it pretty much doubled the budget we were being offered, and we knew we were in the zone.
It was a big gain for the film and added a lot of momentum to casting and started really bringing in the actors. Because at the end of the day, this film is all about great acting.
Being a massive fan of Rod Serling and The Twilight Zone, and I had specifically requested, you know, my agents to look for certain types of films within that genre that I found exciting. I felt compelled to follow certain actors that I was very kind of drawn to their work. You know, so I'd just seen Rushmore at the time and really became a fan of Jason Schwartzman. So I told my agents this, and they brought me back this project, Donnie Darko, and said, well, he's involved with this movie, Donnie Darko, and here's this character, Frank the Bunny, and you have this audition and such day, and here you go. That being said, you know, I read it maybe 5 or 6 times because I really had to make sense of it before I go and audition for this thing. And I remember looking at it and just going, okay, so here's this opportunity to work with Jason Schwartzman, and here's this really kind of interesting script, and Frank the Bunny, 6 feet tall and blonde. Not 6 feet, not blonde. You know what, forget it, it doesn't matter, the script's amazing.
Jason backed out of the movie. We never really got a clear answer as to why, but there was a scheduling conflict, I think, with another film, and I think he was just having second thoughts about the project and whether or not he was the right actor for it. And so he backed out of the role. And I had a panic attack. Then I got this lovely voicemail message from Drew Barrymore saying, I'm in this for you. We're going to find a new Donnie, and we're going to make a great film. And that was like one of the greatest voicemails I've ever gotten in my life. And I took a deep breath, and Monday morning we had a stack of headshots, and Joseph Middleton was saying, I've got this guy, and I've got Lucas Black, the kid from Sling Blade, he's going to put himself on tape, and then we've got the kid from Almost Famous, Patrick Fugit, and he wants to meet, and I'm just like, wow, okay, these are some great people.
But really, when Jake walked in the room, I think he was at Columbia at the time, he said like 3 words, and Richard and I looked at each other just like, yeah, this is the guy.
What happens if you tell Mom and Dad about this, Sam?
You'll put Ariel in the garbage disposal.
God damn right I will.
And then the funny thing about Maggie was Joseph Middleton said, you know, Jake has a big sister, and she's really talented. She's done a lot of stage work, and she's enormously gifted. And I'm like, well, great. You know, why should I hire someone to pretend to be his big sister when I can get the real big sister and have the emotional connective tissue of the family dynamic?
Anyway, I'm not gonna squeeze one out till I'm like 30.
Will you still be working at the yarn barn? Because I hear that's a really great place to raise children.
That's really funny.
This is the great thing about Maggie, is that she tried to talk me out of casting her. She had never really done a movie before. I think she had a cameo in a John Waters film, and that was it at the time. And she's trying to talk me out of casting her. And I'm like, well, no, I want you, and the fact that you're saying what you're saying right now makes me believe in you even more. You know, it was, so she was like actively trying to talk me out of casting her. And sure enough, she delivered. You know, it was a pretty underwritten role, you know, but she really brought so much to it.
You can go suck a fuck.
Oh, please tell me, Elizabeth, how exactly does one suck a fuck?
You want me to tell you?
Please, tell me.
We will not have this.
Mary McDonnell, Holmes Osborne. Holmes was really off of auditions. He just felt like Donnie's dad. And Mary, you know, she was already a tremendous actress, and she just has such a motherly quality.
What happened to my son? I don't recognize this person today.
Then why don't you start taking the goddamn pills?
She was an immediate get. She was like one of those, wait, we can get her?
Has he ever told you about his friend Frank?
Frank?
Yes, the giant bunny rabbit.
What?
I think we went with James Duval because of this kindness that he projects, and this innocence, and this decency.
He's the nicest guy in the world, literally, as a person. But he also looks like he can be, you know, the punk kid sometimes, particularly in the 80s.
I came into the room and they asked if I had any questions, and actually, you know, because I'd spent so much time reading it, I told them, actually, no, I didn't have any questions, but I did want them to know one thing. I absolutely get it. I think at that point, they kind of looked at me kind of really strange. I don't know, you know, if they believed that I had really understood the material, or I had gotten it, but I certainly had, at least to me. And the audition scene was where, it was just one scene, and it was a few lines. It was right after, you know, I'd run over Gretchen, you know, Jenna Malone's character, and ask what they're doing in the middle of the road. And then Donnie shoots me in the eye, and that was the entire audition scenes.
There was a warmth that I wanted underneath the mask. I wanted it to be surprising, that when he takes it off, it's this sweet kid.
When I had finished the audition, Rich and Sean had turned to me and they asked me if I would be willing to be in the suit, because they wanted the actor who was going to be unmasked to be inside the suit too. And my immediate response was like, well, of course I'd be in the suit. I mean, I was actually going to see if I could be in the suit, because that's going to mean I'm going to work more days, which means I make more money. It's a win-win for me.
And it was kind of a bait and switch, you know, that whether Frank the Bunny is malevolent or not. So casting Jimmy was just, it was actually kind of easy.
May we help you?
Yeah, I just registered and they put me in the wrong English class.
You look like you belong here.
The trick in casting Jenna's character was that Jake, you know, Jake was about 20 or so, and although he looked young at the time, but there were so many great actresses, but some of them were, you know, 14 years old or were just too young to play opposite Jake. Once we met with Jenna, she was an immediate choice.
My mom had to get a restraining order against my stepdad. He has emotional problems.
Oh, I have those too. What kind of emotional problems does your dad have?
He stabbed my mom 4 times in the chest.
The way that all the side characters were cast is so quirky and spot on. In particular, the 2 bullies, which a lot of people forget that Seth Rogen is one of those bullies. And now you rewatch and you're like, that's Seth Rogen being a total asshole. But his best friend is even more surprising. It's the lead singer of the band Phantom Planet.
Fuck yeah! You know what I think? I think you did it.
But it's hard to believe that this guy that wrote so many beautiful songs, I totally believed he was a complete scumbag bully that would have gutted anyone in that movie.
People have come together to join hands People who believe that human life is absolutely too important, too valuable, and too precious to be controlled by fear.
It was really challenging to cast Jim Cunningham, obviously because the character turns out to be a pedophile, and actors generally don't want to play a character like that, you know?
We went off of so many names for the Jim Cunningham character. I mean, even people like David Hasselhoff were considered briefly for a time. We did meet with him. But then it was either Drew or Nancy's idea, I don't remember, but it was definitely Flower Films' idea for Patrick Swayze. And we just couldn't believe that he would actually do it.
Good morning, you mongrels.
Good morning.
Is that all the gusto you can muster? I said good morning.
Good morning.
Most actors look for this sort of challenge where they could play somebody that they can bring some humanity to. You know, the irony is that this guy is a pedophile. There's no excuse for the terrible person that this guy is underneath. And yet you put somebody like Patrick Swayze in that role, it's like, wow, that was a bold choice to put that face behind that character.
So we're not supposed to tell anyone what nobody knows.
Yeah. But you tell, what's your doctor's name?
Dr. Thurman, Dad.
Yes. You tell Dr. Thurman whatever you want.
We couldn't think of the right person to play that therapist. And our casting director mentioned Catherine Ross. And we couldn't even believe she hadn't worked in so long. And our casting director informed us, well, she kind of left the business to raise her child. We're like, well, that's respectable, but she wants to work now. Richard and I drove up to her house in Malibu, and it was a very strange first 10 minutes because Richard starts launching into all the reasons why he thinks she should play this role and how much we would love to have her in this role. And she kind of stopped us after about 10 minutes and she said, well, so wait, you want me to do the part? I thought you were coming here to have me convince you to let me do the part. And we all kind of just, no, we thought we were there to convince her to come back, like, do this part, please. And that was the end of the meeting.
It was a very serendipitous casting situation where I was blessed with a lot of people who I had not earned the right to work with, but they were agreeing to work with me. And I was armed with a pretty damn good screenplay.
So at that point, it really became about surrounding ourselves with literally the best, most experienced people who wanted to come and shoot a small movie, really for the art of it.
We were going through a stack of resumes for directors of photography. And I stumbled across Stephen Poster's resume, and I saw second unit photography on Close Encounters of the Third Kind, additional photography on Blade Runner, director of photography on Someone to Watch Over Me, directed by Ridley Scott.
You know, here was this guy who had so much experience. Why would he want to come do this? And we were afraid a little bit that we didn't want to hire anybody who was so experienced that they would steamroll Richard as a director.
And I'm like, if we can get Stephen Poster, then he's got the job. If he will agree to do this, then let's get him.
I was given the script to Donnie Darko and fell in love with the script and knew that I wanted to do this movie. So I called my agent back and they said, okay, we'll set up a meeting.
And so he came to my house, and the first thing he said to me was two things. He said, I want to forget about the age difference between us. It doesn't mean anything. And two, I'm never going to try to tell you how to direct your movie, but I'll be there to guide you through it.
We are going to have an understanding right here. From now on, we're the same age, okay? Forget about that. Forget about my experience. I'm here to be your director of photography.
And that was wonderful. It was just, he knew exactly what to say, and he was there to help me realize my vision and to help us pull this off in 28 days with $4.5 million.
I knew that we had a very tight budget and we were going to be restricted to 12-hour days, period, and they were going to cut us off at that point. So I knew that we had to be very prepared.
I had these big widescreen compositions, and I had time portals, and I had liquid spears growing out of people's chests, and that I need a widescreen for that kind of stuff, you know. Got big landscapes, and it was a real battle, I remember, to get anamorphic, because it was just like, when you're a first-time director, the financier, and the line producer, and the UPM, you're already getting away with a lot to be directing a film at that age. So anamorphic is like, sorry kid, no, you're not going to get your little anamorphic lenses. It's almost like you're a kid in a candy store and they're like, you're not going to get access to that candy and that candy yet because you haven't earned it.
I don't have time to get into a debate about this, Karen. I believe I've made myself clear.
You call this clarity?
The executive producers came to me and said, we can't afford to shoot anamorphic. It's much too expensive. First of all, the equipment was coming from Panavision. My relationship with Panavision was strong and solid enough that I could make sure that we didn't have to spend more money for the equipment. And I explained to the producers, I said, now, there's a new film stock from Kodak that's very, very sensitive, very fast, and it wipes out the need for more light. It's called 5289, and it's 800 ASA stock. It's very fast. Nobody had ever used it for a motion picture. I had never really used it before that. And I said, now the other advantage to anamorphic is that it's widescreen and you don't see the ceilings because of the perspective of the lenses. That means that I'm going to be able to light from the ceiling and save us time and money that way. So they said, okay, fine. Well, those are good. Good answers, and we'll let you go with it. And I was completely bullshitting. I mean, obviously both of those things were true, but I was just trying to come up with an answer for them to allow us to do what Richard wanted and I wanted, which was to shoot this movie in true widescreen.
Really, to kind of mark the times with the wardrobe, we were lucky enough to work with April Ferry, who's just a legendary costume designer. I mean, we basically grew up watching all the movies she designed.
And I don't think, because it was his first film, and he was 24 years old, I don't think he was quite ready for a full-blown costume designer. And we kind of really clicked very nicely.
Little creative gems start coming out of not having enough money to make the movie. So, for instance, it was April's idea that we do uniforms for the kids at school because, one, it's more cost efficient, and two, it gave a bigger sense of conformity for the kids, which was Donnie was fighting against.
The clothes that I did, a lot came out of my garage, which were things that I had held on thinking I might use it one day. And one of them was a costume that Glenn Close had worn in The Big Chill. And it was a costume I had made for her, and it fit Mary perfectly. And it really looked good on her.
And so, with the experience of people like April, we were able to add elements that we weren't thinking of.
There was a moment in the prep for Donnie Darko where all of us kind of freaked out at Richard, and that was the look of the rabbit.
He said, yeah, go ahead, bring me some sketches. So we did, I don't know, it must have been like 5 or 6 sketches. He brought me a sketch of his that he had done, and he said, I want this.
When people saw the rabbit, they were immediately taken aback. They did not expect it to look like that. And they didn't expect it to be painted silver and to be so shiny and menacing looking.
And I looked at it, and Alec looked at it, and we were all disturbed by what this was.
And we gave the drawing to a mask maker, basically. In the mask we know today is what came of that.
And April Ferry, who is incredibly gifted and skilled at what she does, she put together this beautiful fur and the gloves and the claws.
And I remember going in to get fitted for the bunny suit. Naturally, it was just a furry bunny suit, and that was for me, the first time when my impression and my idea of the movie just changed completely. Literally, if I had a tail, it would have stuck straight up because my hair stuck straight up. And I realized at that moment, and it said a lot to me about the character, that all of a sudden that Frank was something a lot more than I realized.
I still, to this day, I will never know why it's a rabbit. It just came to me. Maybe it had something to do with Watership Down, which is featured in the film.
When the other rabbits hear of Fiver's vision, do they believe him?
Why should we care?
Because the rabbits are us, Donnie.
With the art department, we brought on a young production designer named Alec Hammond. And the big trick was the period aspect, because we were shooting a movie that creatively takes place in Virginia, but we were shooting it in Los Angeles.
I love shooting in LA. There's just pretty much everything is available to you. I mean, we got down to Long Beach, to Virginia Country Club is the name of that neighborhood where they shot Ferris Bueller and so many films that had that East Coast look.
Which is this sweet little neighborhood which allowed us, 4 or 5 blocks of what looked like suburban Virginia.
So Alec really was tasked with, helping us frame everything, from putting different tree bases on palm trees to make it, we can't have palm trees in this movie, to really the nostalgic kind of 80s set dressing.
That house was just beautiful and it was perfect. And, we had the bus stop just down the street. We had Jim Cunningham's house up the street. And if you can stay put, you can not move the whole circus and not move the whole company around. You can just stay someplace for like a week. You can get a lot done. Because every time there's a company move, it just disrupts the whole circus.
My mom said the school is closed today because it's flooded. No way. Yeah.
Holy shit, that's the best news I've ever heard.
It's always difficult finding a school that you can actually shoot in because most of them are working schools. We were able to find one in Koreatown here. That's a private school that we were able to shoot during the summer. And it was, it was the red brick and, as long as we framed out the palm trees, it very much looked like an East Coast school.
Grandma Death.
Excuse me? Excuse me? Please stay off the road, Miss Sparrow. If this happens again, I am going to call social services.
I hate that, Miss Farmer.
And then, of course, there was Grandma Death's house in the ranch, and that allowed us another group of locations that we were able to glean out of that.
So it was a collection of our memories and Alec's ability and our location manager, finding those right spots that would fit and still look East Coast and still feel very suburban without ever giving up any elements that this was shot in Los Angeles.
For my entire life, I was a victim of my own fear.
Love.
The Cunning Visions instructional videos with Patrick Swayze and the other actors were all shot at Patrick Swayze's ranch in Calabasas. We shot those videos 1 week before principal photography on the film was to begin. We had all the dialogue written for Patrick. His wife brought out his 80s wardrobe. Those were Patrick's real clothes from the 80s. And his wife, Lisa, was so sweet and supportive, and she's like, Patrick, I think you should wear the pink Izod and your white pleated pants. And, she had all the clothes out on hangers, and she was sort of doing the wardrobe for us.
I thought it was really it was a very silly production. It was a very silly part of the shoot. Jim Cunningham at this moment is sort of a Tony Robbins self-help guy, and he's a goofball, and he's cheesy, and he wants people to like him too much, and he's this guy. He's the guy who says fear and love, and he's going to break life down into these two pretty simplified, categories.
It was based on real curriculum taught to me in middle school and in high school. My gym teacher, I remember, showed us videos, and I was kind of plagiarizing this new age curriculum from my junior high school experience.
I'm not afraid anymore!
The primary component of success for the Jim Cunningham videos was the music. The music really needed to be cheesy and conclusive and, kind of light and airy. We'll have to toot my own horn here, pun intended. My brother and I actually composed that music, so it was very much a Sam Bauer at Enterprise experience there, and my brother Jed Bauer as well.
We cut it all together, and then the following Friday, which was about 2 or 3 days before principal photography was going to begin, Drew Barrymore had a party at Nancy Juvonin's house, and all the cast and crew came, and I brought my VHS tape of the Patrick Swayze infomercials as a sneak preview for everyone to show them. And we put it in the VCR, I think, in Nancy's kitchen, and everyone crowded around, and they watched these videos, and everyone was just like kind of giddy with laughter. And again, it was just like I felt so excited to being able to prove myself and to show, like, okay, I know this is just the self-help videos, but look, here's a sneak peek at what we're about to make. And to this day, I always want to cut something together as quickly as possible. Once we get the dailies, I want to cut something together and start showing it to the crew so they can see what it is. Because once they see it, they believe in it.
This is pretty awesome.
But I think you get what you're looking for.
Awesome.
Pine trees.
Not an in-and-out sign in sight.
That was the first moment of my career, that Steadicam shot, where we find Jake. I was so nervous. Instead of saying cut, I said action a second time. And the whole crew just laughed. And I was embarrassed, but I was just beside myself with excitement because I get to direct a movie. And then we get the dailies back for that first shot. And I remember Nancy Juvonin was sitting next to me, and Sean was there, and everyone was so excited for this beautiful shot to come up. And there was this vibration in it. There was this jitter in the Steadicam. And it was, everything about the shot was perfect, but there was this vibration in it. And I looked over to Tom Hayslip, our line producer, and he was just like, Richard, we're going to reshoot it. We'll figure out if it's an insurance write-off or something. It's a malfunctioning piece of equipment. We'll get back up there at dawn and we'll reshoot it. Like the first shot of my career, there's a jitter in the Steadicam and damn it. But we went back up there and I'm like, oh, please let there be the marine layer. Please let it look as beautiful. Sure enough, there was that marine layer. It was all there. And we had a different Steadicam operator, and we did the exact same shot, and it was beautiful.
It was as though this plan had been with him all his life, pondered through the seasons. Now, in his 15th year, crystallized with the pain of puberty.
With Drew, we literally had a 1-week window in between 2 of her films to shoot her out. And that became, everything. Therefore, we had to start at the school, which typically you wouldn't do because it's very hard to start with first-time filmmakers with a bunch of kids, with a lot of shots, on some of your hardest days. Oh, let's start with those.
We were there for 1 week. We had Drew Barrymore for 1 week. You got to get through that first week, especially as a first-time director. If you don't make it through the first week on schedule and on budget, the crew is not going to be on your side. You have to prove yourself in that first week. So boy, did I have to prove myself. I had a lot to prove, including the big Steadicam sequence through the hallway to Tears for Fears, which was choreographed to Tears for Fears. And originally, I wanted it to be all one shot. And Steven looked at me and said, Richard, that's not going to work.
Right when the song starts, the doors to the bus open. The camera does a 180-degree thing like this. As they pile out of the back of the emergency gate thing, they land on the ground. Boom. Donnie, Ronald, Sean, they're all roughhousing, and boom. We start our Steadicam shot, and we're following them into the school.
I knew the difficulties that was going to pose, and I tried to think about ways of doing it.
There was an opinion that this was just superfluous montage. No one's talking, there's no dialogue being delivered. It's basically a music video, and I should cut it. Because we don't even have the rights to this Tears for Fears song yet.
My relationship with directors is not to tell them no. It's to give them information to let them make their determination one way or the other. So we got to the school on a Saturday morning, and Richard said, okay, well, let's go in and figure this out. And I said, no, Richard, I want you to do something. I want you to go in with the Steadicam operator and do the first part of it yourself and work it out with him. And I said, by the way, here's a stopwatch. And I handed him a stopwatch. 20 minutes later, he came out and he said, okay, we'll do it in 5 shots. I knew that the screen time to do it in 1 shot was never going to work for the song that he wanted to use.
Stephen was like, we're going to light it as a 360-degree environment. We're going to hide in the classrooms. And our Steadicam operator and our first AC are going to be the only ones in the hallway with all the actors. And we're going to choreograph it. And if you want slow motion, you're going to have to yell out ramp to go up to 36 frames per second and then back to 24, and up to 36 and back to 24. And the speed ups will be done in post.
Lighting in there was challenged because we didn't, first of all, didn't have a huge budget, and we needed to find a way of doing it quickly and efficiently. And so there was a line of fluorescents hanging from the ceiling right in the middle of the hallway. And what I did to make that work was I took additional fluorescents and laid them on top of it so it bounced into the ceiling and raised the ambient level of that hallway. And then we put a few accent lights in here and there. There was one point when we introduced Jenna Malone. I couldn't get any light on her face as she was looking into the mirror in in her locker. And I just very gently asked her, I said, there's a little light up there. Would you kind of find a way to raise your head as you close the locker and come around? And she did it beautifully. It's so organic to the scene that nobody ever notices, but it gets this beautiful light on her face.
And we did about 4 takes of each shot, and then we moved out back and we did the dancers, and the mongrel was there, big styrofoam Middlesex mongrel, and we made it. We choreographed it all, and it was a half day, and we pulled it off.
I'll never forget being in the cutting room, assembling the school montage with the Tears for Fears song. I worked for about 52 minutes that morning, and I watched that about 20 times because I thought it was so great.
They put it on a VHS tape, and they sent it over to set in an envelope. And during lunch, I invited the line producer and the UPM and my script supervisor and everyone into my little trailer, and I put the VHS in, and I showed them the edit of that whole montage, starting in the school bus and going all throughout the school hallway and around back and then back in, and they all were just like, wow. Okay, we get it. We get it, Richard. We get it.
This is a classic example of, a fight that Richard won that I'm glad, and we're all glad that he won. Because, oh man, you couldn't imagine, the film wouldn't have been what it was without those opening shots, without the school, without him riding the bike, without him being up, the bike accident up on the hill. These are all the reasons why we love Donnie Darko. These are the first 10 minutes of the experience.
What is the real issue here? The PTA doesn't ban books.
The PTA is here to acknowledge that pornography is being taught in our curriculum.
It's meant to be ironic.
Excuse me, you need to go back to grad school.
The producers asked me, and they said, I want a small crane, a small techno crane inside the auditorium. I said, there's one that's a small base, and we can get it through the doors, and it will afford us to be able to move the camera and extend. Technocrane is a crane that the arm extends and retracts. And I said I could put it in put the chassis of the crane, the base of the crane, pretty much in one area and reach out to many different areas of where we needed quickly, because when you shoot in an auditorium with a raked seating, it's very often very difficult to move cameras and set up cameras, and okay, you have to get out, and we got to remove these seats and put our camera there, and it's just much more restricted. The thought was, in 2.5 days, can we accomplish what we need to accomplish in there? And Richard and I, of course, knew the script. We got to the point where we were ready to do the last scene, which was where Donnie Darko mouths off to Patrick, and he's hauled out of there. We were under the gun. We weren't. We were moving, but not as quickly as we thought we needed to accomplish that sequence. So Richard brilliantly turned to me and said, "Let's do that sequence all handheld." And I said, that's a great idea, because it will afford us to be able to run around with the camera quickly. It will also feel right aesthetically for that, and it will give us a difference than the other 2 sequences that we shot in there.
And action!
Good morning.
Good morning.
How much are they paying you to be here?
Excuse me?
Jake, first off, was he's Donnie Darko.
Ling Ling finds a wallet on the ground filled with money. She takes the wallet to the address on the driver's license, but keeps the money inside the wallet. I'm sorry, Miss Farmer, I don't get this.
He vocalized what I think a lot of people were thinking. Like the whole mentality of like this positive thinking, and everything's going to be all right, and you should know who you're going to be later in life, and this and that. He's like, I don't know anything. I'm confused about it. I think everything we're dealing with is kind of horse shit.
You can't just lump everything into these 2 categories and then just deny everything else.
And I think for us, the audience, we kind of agree with that.
Really hard.
The first time we lit the rabbit, Stephen lit the rabbit on set, and there was smoke and this moody lighting, and the whole set was taken aback. They were like, whoa, what is going on here?
And I think at that moment, Richard had his whole crew. He brought everybody into his madness, and it was no longer madness. There was methodology in it, and everyone was. I don't think everyone understood exactly what was going on, but people were much more flexible.
A lot of the crew had probably had, maybe scanned through the script. They maybe hadn't begun to take me seriously yet, or they didn't really know what the movie was, or what kind of movie it was, and they see this rabbit all of a sudden. Stephen comes up to me and he says, Richard, I wasn't sure about the rabbit at first, but now I get it. I get it.
Everybody on this production responded to not only the script, but to Richard, and Richard's enthusiasm and Richard's certitude about what he wanted. Which is very unusual in a young director like that.
It didn't seem like new people were making it. It seemed like Richard and Sean had already made films. It was like in their heads.
From that moment forward, the rabbit had this power, and it had this way of possessing everyone on set. It was just, the iconography of it worked.
28 days, 6 hours, 42 minutes, 12 seconds.
On the field, when we were shooting the scene where I call him out from the house and tell him that the world's going to end, what you're going to hear on the take, if you're to watch playback, is the world ends in 28 days, 6 hours, 42 minutes and 12 seconds. And you look at this, like, does he understand what I'm saying? I think he does. And not only could he hear me and respond, but he was kind of creeping me out from the other side of the mask. So as I was doing this, all I had to do was kind of look through it and look at him, and he brought the entire thing to life.
He understood from the beginning what the parameters of any shot were. He had a sense of where the frame line was. There are certain actors that have that ability, that have that innate ability. When a camera points at them, they know exactly the power that they have within each frame.
So to continue that throughout the shoot and build momentum as we continued, again, it's like a dream come true. Those are the things you hope that you can you know, kickstart right on the first day, right when you start, and that it becomes a catalyst for all those wonderful things to come.
Originally it was supposed to be Chud. Chud became incredibly difficult to license. Whomever sits behind the desk at whatever studio owns the master of Chud was not being helpful with our clearance department, and they were making us go through a lot of red tape to get access to Chud. And so Linda McDonough, who works at Flower Films, said, well, you know, Rich, I'm friends with Sam Raimi and Anchor Bay, and they will license Evil Dead for us because they own the negative, and they'll give us Evil Dead, and they'll let us use the poster in the lobby, and it's Evil Dead. And I'm like, oh, of course, that's a classic, and that film means so much more in the context of being on a billboard next to The Last Temptation of Christ.
People now don't really remember just how, you know, insane that movie being made or released was. And so I think it was just kind of a wink to the sign of the times, where, you know, we're making a movie about suburban conformity, and, you know, what lies beneath that conformity, and why not throw in, you know, one of the most controversial films of the decade.
And as we're there in Santa Monica shooting at the Aero Theater, we have the billboard, The Last Temptation of Christ, The Evil Dead, Halloween Frightmare. Guess who drives by in his Mercedes while we're shooting? Sam Raimi. He lived in Santa Monica, and he was driving by on Montana in Santa Monica, and he sees this film set and this billboard with his movie playing a double feature with Martin Scorsese's film from 1988, and he's, what the hell is going on here?
Then you'll both readjust forward straight, and once you're both forward straight, you'll start your dialogue, Jimmy.
Okay, stand by.
Why you wear that stupid bunny suit?
Why are you wearing that stupid man suit?
So shooting in there was, you know, kind of a classic opportunity to really recreate a look in a theater. It was a tricky sequence in that the lighting had to be very specific to what we were doing, and especially specific to Frank's eyeball.
For the unmasking of Frank, the makeup special effects was done by Tom Supernut, who had created actually a prosthetic eyepiece patch that you kind of put over it of the eye being blown out, where he had used a single hair for each eyebrow and spent I don't know how many nights creating this patch with one hair at a time for the eyebrow to make it as accurate as possible.
It took a little while to establish the look in there, but once we did, we were able to really take advantage of it. And it you know, had that classic old movie theater, especially the exterior.
Take it off.
I knew, and he knew, and we all knew this is the unveiling of Frank the Bunny. This is this character. You're wondering about him through the entire movie at this point. I have no idea who he is or what he looks like. So this is a very, very important moment to play out.
And I think it's fun and unique and unexpected that you do kind of get a reveal that he's not this villain or this demon or whatever it is you project into it. He's just a normal person that's kind of a casualty of kind of Donnie's journey.
And the first time I appear in the script, which, you know, some people aren't aware of, and it's fun to kind of like play these, like, when's Frank first come out? And it's like he comes out when he drops off Donnie's sister, my girlfriend. In the beginning, the red Trans Am, before the jet engine falls. And then when the jet engine's falling, you actually hear him honking. So that's his first appearance. So who is he? Is he this supernatural character, or is he just her boyfriend?
Wish I knew what you were looking for. Might have known what you were buying.
The liquid spears were always something in my mind. I knew exactly what I wanted them to look like. It was very much a visual reference in a lot of ways to The Abyss, to James Cameron's The Abyss, and to that wonderful digital effect in that film.
But Richard really attached them to a component of destiny as opposed to just, oh, let's just borrow something from The Abyss. You know, he borrowed it and then, you know, reapplied it and recontextualized it in a cool way. And I think that's, you know, part of who Richard is oh, I want to borrow this idea, but I'm going to make it my own. And that's really, at the end of the day, that's the way you got to do it as a creative person.
Well, each vessel travels along a vector through space-time along its center of gravity.
Like a spear.
I beg your pardon?
Like a spear that comes out of your chest.
Sure.
There was a metaphysical logic to it, with the solar plexus and the center of one's being and one's entity, and the idea of predestination and free will.
But we were somewhat in the dark about how that was going to work. I think at some point Richard was too, because we didn't have a definitive visual effects department that would create something and show us what they created. We had to fly by the seat of our pants in that sense.
Richard and Steven boarded those perfectly, like scouted the house meticulously. Every shot was set because we knew where Donnie was exactly walking and where the arrows were going to be. So that was really all in the planning.
I only have a few days left before they catch me.
Did Frank tell you to do these things?
I have to obey him. He saved my life.
At the very end of the whole shoot for Donnie Darko, we ended up in Burbank. We built the motel room, the Holiday Inn set. We had Donnie's bedroom. We also did Dr. Thurman's therapist office. And then we built the bathroom on that soundstage in Burbank.
Donnie going to the medicine cabinet to get those pills is one of the most important shots of the movie, because it allows you to think, well, maybe the pills are doing something, and maybe the pills are causing these psychological departures from reality.
That was one of the things that I always thought was kind of really exciting about the movie. Depending on the cut that you see, he's either on his meds or he's not. Ultimately, he's been on placebos the whole time.
That bathroom set was designed so that we could pull walls and we could achieve the barrier between Frank and Donnie.
He had to have a certain kind of subdued but directional light on him to create the mood of what he was seeing when he was seeing Frank. I had this kind of bundle of fluorescent, and it was a soft light, and I put it out of frame, very low, like on the floor, just shining up. And then I took another light and set it above him, shining down in his face. So if you look at that sequence and you see him interacting with Frank and then interacting with his sister, all he had to do was keep his head down for when he was working with Frank. And then when he raised his head, this light was close enough to his body that it didn't affect the face, but what then took over was the light on top. It's a very simple solution to a complicated problem.
I mean, for me, first off, I have to say that playing Frank was probably one of the easiest jobs I've ever had. If you were to watch us film it, it wouldn't have that same, it wouldn't carry the same weight. In other words, you know, you could watch Donnie's stuff and that would, or Jake's stuff, and that would be exactly what you see on the movie. But once you reverse that, even with the weird lighting, it's sort of, you see me in the outfit and you see me in the mask, and you'll hear Rich's voice, and you can cut everything out and look in the monitor and just, okay, Jimmy, turn your head to the left. Look straight. Turn your head to the right. Look straight. Look up. That's the universe kind of opening up. Look straight. Perfect. Cut.
When Jake is actually stabbing the liquid barrier that separates him and Frank, we had a big piece of plexiglass. And there's a shot in the movie where you can see as he approaches it, but the glass is there and the lightning flickered, you can see a tiny reflection of that glass there.
At one point, like I remember when he was stabbing, it actually scratched the glass. So they had to polish it off so you couldn't see it.
And then it was just adding the digital effect and the sort of fourth dimensional barrier. And this language of liquid and salt water, really, which has become a motif through all my films.
Wait a minute. Here's your brother.
Oh, fell in your room.
We did do the engine on a set, and Alec built Donnie's bedroom on a set.
And Alec, to his credit, went out to the airline graveyard and found this jet engine. They were able to, I think, they took all the guts out of it to make it light enough to work with. The jet engine was rigged, was brought in that night, and was supposedly going to be dropped onto the scene.
All I know is when they brought in the jet engine on the night before the final day, because it was the final day when we did the jet engine, they brought it in on a forklift and it got stuck.
Robbie Knott came to me and said, we got to take a break for a couple hours. We went outside, gave him the set. He figured out the solution. During that time, we grabbed those shots of the airplane going by that Holiday Inn. It was a wonderful opportunity to just pick up a couple things while we were waiting to solve this disaster. And we came back in a couple of hours. Robbie had solved the problem.
We had one shot with that jet engine. 3 cameras, all running at various high-speed frame rates, and we had one shot. We weren't going to get to do it twice. We had one set, one engine, and that was it. One of our operators had to tip down with it in half a second to get that shot where it just does this, and he nailed it, thank God. And that's Stephen Poster. He brings in the best people. He knows on a day like that you got to get your super A-list operator in.
There were actually different stuff that we didn't use. There was a shot where Donnie was actually impaled. So we had a couple different endings because we weren't sure if we wanted to physically show his sacrifice or to allow people to extrapolate their own view of the ending.
And it was really disturbing. It was a step too far. It was something that no one really wanted to see.
Burn it to the ground.
The very last day of principal photography was about 4 in the morning in a parking lot in Burbank, where we had taken Dr. Lillian Thurman's therapist set, redressed it as Patrick Swayze's house, Jim Cunningham's internal lair where Donnie is going to throw the gasoline and ignite the flame. That was the last shot of the whole movie. I'll never forget, that set went up like a book of matches. It just exploded into flame, and it got so hot we had to pull the cameras back, and the fire department had to turn on their hoses and put out the fire. But that was the end. And it was like this, it was this ceremonial burning. And that was it. It was a wrap on my first feature film, and we burned it to the ground.
Getting the Donnie Darko editing job was not academic. I had to jump through a lot of hoops. They didn't want to put a first-time director with a first-time editor. That was the line in the sand from the Bond company and from some of the producers. Flower Films, Nancy Javonin stepped in and made sure that I got that job.
Well, the editing is always a huge challenge on my films because there's so much story, and I add all of these lyrical moments that are music video, montage.
To cut it down, to cut a very complex script, it's like an old sweater. If you pull one little thread, the whole thing can fall apart. So editorial was very difficult and very laborious.
I was carrying cans from the laboratory to the telecine. I was doing things that a director of photography doesn't normally do, but at that point I was so in love with the picture that I wanted to do anything to make sure that it got done properly.
Have you ever seen a portal?
visual effects in Donnie Darko, I think, pretty much borrow from every school of visual effects. Matte paintings at the end with the digital time storm, which is basically just, you know, a painting on glass, which is really, you know, a technique that's, you know, 50, 60 years old, maybe older. The bunny rabbit interacting in the bathroom with Donnie, you know, those are two-dimensional effects done by a friend of mine, Kelly Carlton.
And then I didn't really think about what we were going to do in post, you know, at all until we showed up, you know, after the shoot and sat in the, you know, in the audio room. And we came up with this idea of kind of breaking up and putting pauses in certain places.
I've been watching you.
Carefully pronouncing certain words in certain ways to make them appear as if it might be otherworldly.
Wake up, Donnie.
Well, I remember it was Jim Juvonen, who's Nancy's brother, recommended Michael Andrews. And he had been working on Freaks and Geeks. And Jim said that Michael has this tremendous ability to experiment if someone will allow him to experiment.
I just remember getting the movie, and it was very long when I first got it. And at the time I lived down in San Diego, and there was an old piano in the basement, and I just went down to the piano, and the first thing I wrote was the opening of the movie, you know, right where those long piano chords. And I just want it to be simple. I noticed that once I started putting stuff on the picture, it didn't really want a lot of stuff. It just wanted sort of bigger statements.
Working with Mike, it was a real collaboration, and it was a lot of pushing into unusual soundscapes.
Beth's mom said the boys' locker room was flooded and they found feces everywhere. What are feces? Baby mice. Aww.
For a lot of the moving around in the movie, I just started layering this keyboard right here over some of the scenes and just interpreting the movement in a very abstract and atonal way. I sent it to the cutting room, and they cut it in all over the movie. Like, it was just like, I did it for like 3 or 4 scenes, and then they cut it all over the movie, and they're like, God, this is really working. And I was like, wow, it is. This is really working. That's great. It needed the heart. I mean, that was one of the primary things. Richard didn't ask me for that, but the producers asked me for that. They wanted the relationship. They wanted at the core of it to be a love, like a love story.
You know, and there's a moment when it all comes together when they have that school report where they're going to invent this invention that they can put on babies to show them beautiful images when they're sleeping.
And did you stop and think that maybe infants need darkness? That maybe darkness is part of their natural development?
And then they get interrupted. Didn't your dad, like, stab your mom? And you can just see her face drop. And she runs out, and you see it in Donnie's face. It's heartbreaking. And he runs up to her, and the only thing he wants is he just wants her to be okay. And he reaches out to her, and he grabs her, and he's not trying to kiss her. He just says, I'm so sorry. And what does she do? She kisses him. And it makes my hair stand up. I've cried when that happened. I thought that was such a beautiful moment.
It's the innocent feeling of love. It's not like the complex adult love. It's the simple, like, you know, can't catch your breath kind of love, you know. That's what it was for me. And that's why it suspends and holds forever instead of being filled up with a bunch of notes, you know.
Richard very much designed many of the sequences in the film to particular songs, whether it was Tears for Fears or Killing Moon. And we had these great young music supervisors, Manish Raval and Tom Wolfe, who were really kind of helping us get to these bands saying you're going to be part of something special. because we didn't have the money. We didn't have a big music budget, obviously.
Everyone was like, this is impossible. You're never going to get this music. You're never going to get these songs. He's like, oh yeah, I will. You just show him the movie, you know, go get the songs.
It is my very distinct pleasure to introduce to you Emily Bates, Susie Bailey, Samantha Darko, Beth Farmer, and Joni James. They are Sparkle Motion.
The one that ended up being very difficult was the Sparkle Motion dance sequence, which we literally shot it and choreographed it to Pet Shop Boys' West End Girls. And we had deals with INXS where it was Favored Nations, where we couldn't pay any other song more than we were paying for theirs. And the Pet Shop Boys wanted $100,000 for their song, and they wouldn't budge off of it. So we had to go back in and recut the dance sequence to a different song.
And we were able to get Duran Duran to replace it.
I think West End Girls was probably a little bit funnier. You know, I don't think the film is marred by the Duran Duran song. I'm sure there's people who disagree with me on that one.
We were really trying to find the right song for the end sequence. Originally, Richard had thought U2's MLK, which we didn't really see as that appropriate considering it was about MLK. We knew there was no way we were going to afford it. U2's the biggest band in the world.
And I called Nancy Javonin, and I said, I have an idea for the end title. And she's like, oh, what is it? And so I said, cool. I said, okay. So I put the phone down, and I played Mad World, and I sang the idea to her. And she's like, oh, that sounds awesome. Do it. I said, okay, I'm going to do it.
All around me are familiar faces, worn out places, worn out faces.
And we came in, and he had literally just recorded Mad World with Gary Jules singing, and it was just something that the two of them, I believe, were messing around with. And they just recorded the song in his little studio at his house, at Mike's house. And when we went in the room and sat down and watched it over picture, it was perfect.
That was the most poignant aspect of this movie. No matter, they take this old Tears for Fears song and do this really melancholy kind of stripped down version of it. And it plays over that ending. And no matter how you interpret the ending or what you think of it, it's one of those cases where, like, I can't imagine this movie without that song.
Never in a million years did I realize it would go to become the #1 single at Christmas in the United Kingdom, and it would sell like 1 million copies, and people would sing it on American Idol.
It's one of the most perfect combinations of music and film that I've seen in terms of, like, the soundtrack captures the 80s vibe, kind of the visual stylistic things capture the 80s vibe.
You gotta see Grandma Death.
Why? Look, is this about the book?
No, it's Frank. Donnie. Because time is running out. We gotta go.
When we finally got a cut that we were going to submit to Sundance, it was still a little long, or at least people were telling us it was a little long, and we went with the cut, and it got into Sundance. And that's really where the shit hit the fan in a lot of ways. But I remember our first screening of the film, it was really the hot ticket. Remember Entertainment Weekly would have the buzzometer, you know, where it would show like kind of the hottest films coming into the festival, which you never really want to be on, or so we learned later. I remember Harvey Weinstein showing up, and somehow he had a Donnie Darko crew hat on. We don't know how he got that. Still to this day, don't know how. But when he showed up with the Donnie Darko hat on, a lot of the distributors left.
And sure enough, when we showed the movie at Sundance, it was not well received. It was kind of a disaster, to be honest.
I remember when the screening ended and they opened the Q&A, the first thing that someone said at one of the screenings, he'd gotten up, I think it was the second screening, and he just said, "This is the worst movie at Sundance. This is absolutely the worst film here. You didn't follow any of the filmmaking rules. It doesn't make sense. This is a horrible movie." And then right away, someone got up maybe 2 rows, almost right beeline behind him, She's like, I absolutely disagree. You know what? I think this is the best movie at Sundance. I think this is the best movie I've seen in a long time. That just goes to show you don't have to follow those rules. You can break those rules and you can make something that's dynamic and makes you feel, and this is the best movie I've seen at Sundance. So right there, I'm like looking at these two guys, and in the course of 2 minutes, this 50-50 dichotomy of like night and day, hate and love. And I thought at that moment that we had something.
What are you guys doing in the middle of the road, huh? What are you thinking?
And there was an environment that was not comfortable with seeing a teenager fire a gun. And I feel like there was a post-Columbine anxiety that made a lot of distributors use that as a reason to say no.
A couple distributors wanted to distribute it if we cut like a half hour out of the movie. And at that point, we knew we could probably get 6 or 7 minutes out of the movie without completely disassembling the logic of a movie that is already incredibly complex to follow. But for people to tell us, you know, if you cut 30 minutes out of it and make Frank the Bunny, you know, Stabby Frank, who's off killing kids, that's the movie kind of the distributors wanted at the time. And even in script phase, they wanted us to turn Frank the Bunny into Stabby Frank the Bunny, who's off stabbing kids. It's like, that's never how the movie was designed.
And at the time, movies sold at the festival, but once the festival was over, your movie was damaged goods if it didn't have a deal. And the more time that went on after the festival, the more damaged your film was.
They're slipping away.
I am sorry that you have failed. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have another appointment.
So we went into Sundance, literally the hottest ticket in town, and we left Sundance tail between your legs. I mean, people didn't like the movie. They didn't respond to the movie.
When we got Donnie Darko back from Sundance, we hadn't sold the film. It was 2 hours and 15 minutes or something like that. We just started squeezing it and making it smaller. And I think the ultimate impact that had was it just brings all the plot points a little closer together.
It became apparent that we were going to have to drop all of the music and replace it with like catalog stuff that was just sound alike, kind of, nothing memorable, nothing recognizable. We were going to have to lose all of it.
And really the only company that was left after the dust settled was Newmarket. And there was a guy at Newmarket at the time named Aaron Ryder who came on board. Great guy, great producer. And he came into editorial with us and really helped us kind of come to the film that we ended up with. I think we cut maybe 7 or 8 minutes out of the Sundance version.
And then he invited his bosses at Newmarket to screen the film, and he made a very strategic decision by inviting Christopher Nolan and his wife to watch Donnie Darko.
So we went to a screening, and there's a nice guy named Christopher Nolan. So he watches the film with us and the producers and financiers and distributor.
And when the lights went up, Chris and his wife said very kind things to the head of Newmarket and encouraged them to buy the film and to protect it.
He had one note, and I believe it was about how we present the title cards. But essentially, he was like, I wouldn't change anything except maybe these title cards.
And then Aaron had the idea of doing one additional day of photography to add James Duval to the Mad World montage, to see the mask being built and have him touch his eye. And we finished it. And then we had to convince Newmarket to put it in theaters because they still weren't going to necessarily do a theatrical release. And so we brought the heads of Newmarket over to Drew Barrymore's office. And we put him in the room with Drew Barrymore. And she turned on that smile and she said, "You guys are going to put this in theaters now, aren't you? Aren't you?" And they had to say yes. Sure enough, they were like, all right, we'll put it in the 50 theaters, Halloween weekend, and we'll do a Halloween-themed release with the mask and the Halloween theme of the film. So we're like, finally, we survived this this ordeal, and we're gonna get a theatrical release, and it'll be reviewed by major critics, and you know, we made it.
And then 9/11 happened, and none of us really were too thrilled of the idea about releasing the film, which in the independent world was really New York and LA. So those were really the two cities. If it worked there, then it would go elsewhere.
And the last thing on anyone's mind for those few months, you know, I was in New York at the time, I was going to the movies or seeing movies. Like, people were really fixated on what was going on in the world at that time.
We did our best we could to try and get the word out and do whatever press we could do and get whatever grassroots marketing we could pull off, and it debuted at the end of October.
I think it's fascinating that earlier that year, Mulholland Drive had come out, and it was almost like a lot of the complaints and things I've seen people write in reviews were the same tricks that David Lynch pulled off. But for whatever reason, Mulholland Drive got, you know, rightfully praised, and yet I wonder if it's because it was a first-time filmmaker that people responded the way they did. But sometimes I feel like when you're seeing something 100% truly unique, it's impossible to give it context. The people that did get to see it, which were the people that were on top of the film festivals and reviewing movies, were very mixed on it and kind of, nice try, kid, with your ambition, but this movie doesn't work.
I think our per screen average on 54 theaters was around $1,100. So it was just clear that the movie was going to be gone in a couple weeks.
I even had friends going, so Jimmy, you know, when's Donnie Darko coming out? And I had to tell them, well, you know, where were you 6 months ago? I mean, that movie was out, that came and left. I don't know what to tell you.
So, you know, after this long, amazing journey where we worked with all these great people, here we were, movies completely failed. What the hell do we do now? And really it wasn't till a year later when it came out in the UK that the movie actually kind of exploded.
They did this big graffiti art campaign, and people were doing murals with Smurf orgies and all sorts of stuff, and they flew me over to the UK, and it was this huge success all of a sudden.
So it really all started in the UK, and then the popularity there filtered back into the States on DVD.
Thank God we at least got a theatrical release, because it never would have been seen, and nor would it have even gotten the DVD distribution through Fox had it not gotten a theatrical release. It would have gone way under the radar.
And I think you have to remember the context. This was only a few short years after the Blair Witch Project. And the Blair Witch Project was the movie that very successfully launched the first viral campaign. And the only other movie I could think of in that time period was Donnie Darko. It didn't end watching the movie. This was one of the first movies I remember friends calling me up and be like, did you go to the website? There's like this hidden thing in the corner that unlocks like a page from the, you know, from Roberta Sparrow's book, or whatever intricate things they hit on the website.
So it just kind of grew like a weird pop culture phenomenon. And I remember, you know, Richard calling me going, Frank the Bunny's on The Simpsons. I think that's when we really realized how big it was.
So it took its time to really become part of the lexicon. And it is. It is now part of the film lexicon.
After the success in the UK, which spawned the success on DVD in the States, they came to us and said, hey, listen, would you guys go back in and do a director's cut of the film and expand it, and we'll put it in theaters, you know, essentially to drive the director's cut DVD. Richard and I spent 3 or 4 months kind of reconceiving what are we going to do for the director's cut.
Who was Frank?
A 6-foot-tall bunny rabbit.
We knew that there was a new audience for the film, and we wanted to get it back in theaters. And I knew there was all this additional footage, and there was the time travel book, and there was an opportunity to do a longer cut of the movie.
Like most people, I saw the theatrical, and then the director's cut was initially a little bit hard to swallow because music cues are in different places. There's additional scenes, there's additional stuff that kind of explains a lot. And I wonder if that's just a product of it coming too soon.
That's scary. You think?
If you put aside the close-ups of the book and things like that, there's some really great character moments between that family that are not in the original theatrical. And in particular, there's one great scene with Donnie Darko and his father, Eddie, outside sitting at their table.
And Donnie goes to his father and he says, Dad, and he just lays it out on the table, I think I'm crazy. And his dad looks at him and says, son, I used to be crazy, but you're not crazy.
They're all part of this great big conspiracy. Bullshit. And they're scared of people like you.
And there's going to be people that are going to judge you for it and critique you for it. They're not going to like you for it, but you know what you say to those people? Huh? Do you, son? Fuck you. And I thought right there that for that father-son moment that I had just experienced a father and son moment that I was going to carry on with me for the rest of my life.
But I love it. I think that's the strength of the director's cut now in retrospect with a little bit of time, is that it adds back in some really great character moments, but in particular between the family.
It's probably too long, it's probably more indulgent than it needs to be, but it doesn't nullify the theatrical cut. And I like that there's two cuts of the movie.
But it came about basically because of the pop culture phenomenon. They wanted to keep it going.
It was a true artistic breakthrough for me and a very important point in my career. So I have a huge affection for this movie because it allowed me to do what I had been trying to do previously, which was throw out the technical. The technical is there no matter what I do. So I understand that and I know how to work with that. What I wanted to do was work more intuitively, and I was able to do it on this movie.
The ideas, these sort of seemingly small ideas that I had in my studio or things I came up with in my basement in San Diego were suddenly on the big screen with all this hoopla. It was pretty awesome.
I mean, that's definitely easily one of the high points of my career and my life for me, because if I wasn't an actor, this movie would be one of my favorite movies.
I felt it was very weird. And then I fell in love with it. I mean, I really did. It was such an interesting premise.
There are so many theories online. There's so much written about the film, and there's fan art and this discourse that exists in the realm of the internet. And I'm grateful for anyone that wants to write a term paper or build a blog or express an opinion about what the film means, and if they want to explore the mythology of the time travel book.
The movie was actually designed so that people can draw their own conclusion from it. I know what it means to me, but my answer every time I've been asked that is, well, what does it mean to you? What do you think happened? Because there's no real wrong answer.
I may disagree with it, but it doesn't mean that they're wrong. And I'm allowed to have my opinion too. So I'm just grateful that there are opinions that continue to exist and are expressed with passion and enthusiasm, and that's all I ask for.
Sometimes I'm afraid that you'll tell me that this is not a work of fiction. I can only hope that the answers will come to me